Deep within the Jedi archives on Coruscant, behind quantum-locked doors that only the Grand Master can open, sits a single black holocron. No Jedi has activated it in over 3,000 years. The Council keeps its existence hidden even from their own members. Only 5 living beings in the entire galaxy know what information it contains. That holocron describes a weapon, not a lightsaber, not a fleet, not a superweapon that destroys planets. This weapon killed no one directly. It fired no shots. It required no ammunition. Yet it was responsible for the complete annihilation of the Brotherhood of Darkness, the collapse of multiple Sith empires, and very nearly the extinction of Force sensitivity itself across the galaxy. Every Sith Lord who discovered its existence dedicated their remaining years to one goal: ensuring this weapon could never be built again. Darth Bane studied it and concluded it was too dangerous even for the Sith. Darth Revan encountered records of it and immediately destroyed them. Even Palpatine, in all his ambition and power, feared what this weapon represented. The Jedi who created it were executed by their own council. The plans were supposedly destroyed. The prototypes were buried on forgotten worlds. And the last time someone attempted to recreate it, they triggered a Force wound that still exists 5,000 years later. This is the story of the weapon both Jedi and Sith agreed must never exist. This is the story of the Thought Sever. Act 1. The Ancient Discovery. Chapter 1. The Qua Legacy. 37,000 years before the Galactic Empire, before the Old Republic, before even the Rakata Infinite Empire, an advanced species called the Qua dominated the galaxy. They didn't conquer through war. They didn't need armies or fleets. The Qua had mastered something far more fundamental than hyperspace or weaponry. They had learned to manipulate the Force at its most basic level, to alter the very fabric of how the Force interacted with reality. Their greatest achievement was the Infinity Gate network, massive structures that allowed instantaneous transportation across the entire galaxy by bending space and force in ways that shouldn't be possible. But the Infinity Gates were only the beginning. The Qua had developed something far more ambitious, something they called Project Severance. The details are fragmentary, recovered only from ruins and half-destroyed data cores. But the objective was clear: to create a way to permanently sever an individual's connection to the Force without killing them. Not force suppression, which was temporary. Not inhibition, which could be overcome. True, permanent severance. A person would remain alive, healthy, conscious, but the Force would cease to exist for them. They would become invisible to it, unable to touch it or be touched by it for the rest of their existence. The Qua never completed this project. According to the fragments discovered by later civilizations, they realized the implications too late. The technology worked, but it had a cascading effect they hadn't predicted. Every test subject became what they called a Force void, a walking wound in the fabric of the Force itself. Reality behaved strangely around them. Probabilities shifted. The natural flow of the Force developed distortions. In their final records, the Qua warned any species that might follow them. This technology must never be completed. They claimed they had destroyed all prototypes and erased all detailed plans. They sealed what fragments remained in vaults, protected by quantum locks and Force barriers that would last millions of years. The Qua civilization collapsed soon after, and their warning was forgotten. Chapter 2. The Jedi Discovery. 25,000 years later, the Jedi Order on Tython had developed their own sophisticated understanding of the Force. Unlike the Jedi who would come later, the Jedi believed in perfect balance between light and dark, Ashla and Bogan. They were scholars and scientists as much as Force users, constantly pushing the boundaries of what was understood about the Force's nature. A Jedi archaeologist named Cara Dul specialized in studying ancient civilizations, particularly the mysterious Qua. Most Jedi found Qua technology incomprehensible, but Kara had a gift for understanding their dimensional mathematics and force manipulation theories. She had spent decades exploring abandoned Qua facilities scattered across the deep core. In a vault beneath Tython's southern continent, Kara discovered something that would change the galaxy forever. A Qua data archive that had somehow survived intact for 25 millennia. Most of it was corrupted or encrypted beyond recovery, but Kara managed to extract one complete file. It was the incomplete Project Severance research, hundreds of technical documents, experimental data, theoretical frameworks for force manipulation at the quantum level, and, most critically, partial schematics for a device the Qua had called the severance engine. Kara understood immediately what she was looking at. This wasn't just academic knowledge. This was a functional design for permanently severing force connections. The Qua had gotten close to completing it before they stopped. With Jedai understanding of force meditation and modern technology, someone could finish what the Qua had abandoned. She brought her discovery to the Jedi Council, expecting them to see the academic value, the potential for understanding force mechanics at a deeper level. Instead, she encountered something she'd never seen from the Jedi before. Fear. The Council ordered the data destroyed immediately. They commanded Kara to reveal the vault location so it could be collapsed and sealed permanently. They forbade any further research into Qua force manipulation technology. When Kara protested, arguing that knowledge shouldn't be suppressed, they threatened her with exile from the Order. The Jedi Council understood something Kara didn't yet grasp. In the wrong hands, or even in the right hands with good intentions, this technology represented an existential threat to every Force user in the galaxy. A weapon that could permanently sever someone from the Force was a weapon that could destroy the Jedi, the Sith, every Force-sensitive lineage in existence. But Kara had already made copies, secret backups hidden in personal archives, encrypted and scattered across multiple locations. She told herself she was preserving knowledge, protecting research from short-sighted suppression. She believed the Jedi Council was wrong to fear understanding. She kept the secret for 7 years, and then the Rakata came. Chapter 3. The Infinite Empire. The Rakata Infinite Empire exploded across the galaxy with terrifying speed, conquering world after world with their force-powered technology. They had discovered how to create ships, weapons, and devices, powered entirely by the Force, drawing on the dark side's raw power to fuel their conquest. The Jedi fought desperately to defend Tython and the surrounding systems, but they were outmatched. Rakata force-powered weapons cut through Jedi defenses. Rakata ships moved with impossible speed. Every battle turned into a massacre. Kara watched her fellow Jedi die in the hundreds, then thousands. She saw the Rakata conquerors use the Force as a weapon of pure domination, twisting it to their will with no regard for balance or consequences. And she made a decision that would echo through millennia. She would complete the severance engine. Working in secret, Kara spent 2 years reconstructing the Qua device from their incomplete plans. She filled gaps with Jedi Force manipulation techniques. She adapted their dimensional mathematics to modern understanding. She solved problems the Qua had never overcome, using insights they hadn't possessed. The severance engine she finally created was approximately 3 meters tall, a cylindrical device covered in crystalline matrices and force-reactive components. It looked more like a meditation chamber than a weapon. At its heart was a focusing array made from rare cortosis ore and force-imbued crystals, configured in patterns that created standing waves in the Force itself. The device operated on a principle the Qua had discovered but never fully controlled: force resonance disruption. Every living being connected to the Force maintains a unique resonance pattern, a frequency at which their consciousness interfaces with the Force. The severance engine could detect that pattern, match it precisely, and then introduce an inverse wave that canceled it permanently. The target would feel the Force connection begin to fade, like a sound growing distant. Within seconds, the connection would be completely severed, permanently, irreversibly. The person would remain alive and healthy in all other respects, but the Force would cease to exist for them. They would become a void, invisible to Force sight, immune to Force powers, and utterly incapable of using the Force themselves. Kara tested it on herself first, using a low power setting that would create only a temporary severance lasting minutes. She activated the device and felt her Force connection fade to nothing. The experience was devastating. She described it later as like losing one of her primary senses, like going blind and deaf simultaneously, but worse because the Force was more fundamental than mere sight or hearing. When her connection returned after 5 minutes, she wept with relief, but she had proven the device worked. The Jedi Council discovered what she had done 3 days later. Act 2. The Weapon's First Use. Chapter 4. The Decision. The Jedi Council convened an emergency session when they learned of Kara's project. The arguments were furious and immediate. Some council members demanded her immediate exile and the device's destruction. Others saw the Rakata threat and wondered if desperate times required desperate measures. A few argued the device should be preserved but never used, kept as a deterrent. Master Rajavari, the Order's most prominent philosopher, made the argument that would ultimately decide the issue. The Rakata conquered through the Force. Their entire civilization was built on Force-powered technology and dark side domination. If their Force users could be permanently severed, their empire would collapse overnight. Ships would fail. Weapons would stop working. Their conquest would end. But using the severance engine would require becoming what the Jedi opposed, those who used the Force as a weapon of domination. It would mean taking an irreversible action against sentient beings, changing them forever without their consent. It would mean crossing a line the Jedai had never crossed. The debate raged for 2 weeks while the Rakata fleets drew closer to Tython. Finally, the Council reached a decision. They would not use the severance engine. The price was too high. The precedent too dangerous. They would fight the Rakata through traditional means, or they would fall, but they would not destroy the fundamental principles that made them Jedai. They ordered Kara to dismantle the device immediately. She refused. That night, Kara took the severance engine and fled Tython on a stolen ship. She believed the council was wrong, blinded by philosophy while their order died around them. She would save the Jedi even if they couldn't save themselves. She would use the weapon they feared. Chapter 5. The Severance. Kara tracked the Rakata command fleet to the Lihan system, the heart of the Infinite Empire. 23 Rakata battleships surrounded their throne world, defended by thousands of the Infinite Empire's most powerful Force users. It should have been suicide for one Jedai with an experimental device to approach. But the Severance engine had one capability even Kara hadn't fully tested: range. The quasi-dimensional mathematics meant the device could target Force users across vast distances, even light years away, if properly configured. The Force connected all living things, and the Severance engine could follow those connections like roads leading directly to its targets. Kara positioned her ship at the edge of the Lihan system, powered up the Severance engine, and targeted every Force-sensitive signature she could detect on the Rakata command ships. Hundreds of signatures, thousands, every Force user in the fleet. Then she activated the weapon. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Across 23 ships, every Force-sensitive Rakata felt their connection to the Force begin to fade. Within seconds, it was gone, permanently severed. Thousands of Rakata Force users became ordinary beings in the space of heartbeats. The Rakata ships immediately began to fail. Their Force-powered engines sputtered and died. Their weapons went offline. Life support systems collapsed. The entire fleet went dark simultaneously, thousands of Rakata dying in the vacuum of space as their ships became tombs. The Infinite Empire's military command structure disintegrated in minutes. Without their Force users, the Rakata couldn't maintain control over their slave species. Without Force-powered technology, their conquered worlds began to rebel. Within weeks, the Infinite Empire entered a death spiral that would end in complete collapse. Kara had won. One weapon, one use, and she had shattered the greatest military power the galaxy had ever known. But she had also created something that terrified both sides of the Force forever. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. When Kara returned to Tython, the Jedi Council arrested her immediately. They confiscated the severance engine and placed her under guard while they deliberated her fate. The debate this time was shorter and far angrier. Master Rajavari led the prosecution. Yes, Kara had saved the Jedi from the Rakata threat. Yes, her weapon had achieved what years of conventional warfare could not. But the cost was incalculable. She had created a weapon that could destroy the Force itself if used on a large enough scale. She had demonstrated that any sufficiently advanced Force user with enough technical knowledge could build a device to permanently sever Force connections. Worse, word was already spreading. The Rakata survivors knew what had happened to their Force users. Other civilizations were learning about the severance engine. Force-using species across the galaxy now knew that their greatest strength could be permanently taken from them by technology. The precedent was catastrophic. The Jedi Council reached a unanimous verdict. Cara Dul would be executed for creating a weapon that threatened the existence of all Force users. The severance engine would be completely destroyed, every component melted down or atomized. All records of its construction would be erased. The Qua research Kara had discovered would be sealed behind Force barriers that would last 10,000 years, and any Jedi or Jedi who ever attempted to recreate severance technology would face immediate execution, no trial, no debate. Kara accepted her sentence without protest. In her final words, she said, "I saved us from the Rakata, but I also created something that could end us all. I understand now what the Qua understood. Some knowledge is too dangerous to exist. I only wish I had learned that lesson before I built the weapon." The Jedi executed her 3 days later. They believed they had ended the threat. They were wrong. Act 3, The Scythe Discovery, Chapter 7, Fragments in the Dark. 7,000 years after Kara's execution, the Sith Empire rose from the unknown regions, built by dark Jedi exiles who had discovered the Sith species and learned the dark side's deepest secrets. These Sith Lords were obsessed with power, with finding ancient knowledge that could give them advantages over their rivals. A Sith Lord named Darth Scabrous was excavating Jedi ruins on Tython when he discovered something extraordinary, a sealed vault containing fragments of Kara's research. The Jedi hadn't destroyed everything as they'd claimed. Some records had survived, incomplete but tantalizing. Technical data about Force resonance disruption, partial schematics for crystalline focusing arrays, theoretical frameworks for permanent Force severance. Scabrous immediately recognized what he'd found. A weapon that could permanently strip Force users of their power. A weapon that could neutralize enemy Sith Lords without killing them, leaving them helpless but alive to witness their own powerlessness. A weapon that would make him the most feared Sith in the Empire. He spent 8 years trying to reconstruct the severance engine from incomplete data. He failed. The quasi-dimensional mathematics were beyond him. The crystalline configurations didn't work. Every test prototype either did nothing or exploded. The Jedi had destroyed just enough critical information to make reconstruction impossible. But Scabros made a critical mistake. He told his apprentice about the research. He shared the fragments he'd discovered, and his apprentice, seeing an opportunity, killed Scabros and took the research for himself. This pattern repeated across centuries. Sith would discover fragments of severance research in ancient ruins or forgotten archives. They would attempt reconstruction. They would fail. They would share the knowledge with apprentices or rivals. And gradually, knowledge of the severance engine spread through the Sith Empire like a virus, but no one could recreate it. Until Darth Carax. Chapter 8. Carax's achievement. Darth Carax was different from previous Sith who'd attempted to recreate the severance engine. He wasn't interested in power or dominance. He was interested in understanding. Carax had been a scientist before the dark side claimed him, someone who approached the Force with analytical precision rather than raw ambition. When he discovered severance research in the archives of a dead rival, Carax spent 30 years studying it, not trying to rebuild the device, but trying to understand the fundamental principles. He studied quad-dimensional mathematics from first principles. He conducted thousands of experiments on force resonance patterns. He developed new theoretical frameworks that the original Jedi researchers had never imagined. And eventually, he succeeded where all others had failed. He built a working severance engine. Carax's version was more refined than Kara's original, smaller, more portable, more precise. It could target specific individuals from kilometers away. It could be calibrated to create temporary severance lasting hours or permanent severance lasting forever. Most dangerously, it could be configured to work autonomously, targeting anyone who met specific Force signature criteria. Carax tested it on slaves first, Force-sensitive beings captured from conquered worlds. The device worked flawlessly, permanent severance with no side effects except the loss of Force connection. The subjects remained alive and healthy, just incapable of ever touching the Force again. Then Carax made his move. He invited 5 rival Sith Lords to his fortress under the pretense of forming an alliance. When they arrived, he activated the severance engine from concealment. All 5 Sith Lords felt their Force connections fade to nothing in seconds, permanently severed. They were now ordinary beings, helpless against a Sith Lord who retained his full power. Carax didn't kill them. That was the genius of his approach. He let them live, let them return to their domains, let them experience what it meant to be former Sith Lords with no Force abilities. Within weeks, their apprentices had killed them or they had died, trying to use powers they no longer possessed. Word spread through the Sith Empire like wildfire. A weapon existed that could permanently destroy a Sith Lord's power without killing them. A weapon that was portable, precise, and impossible to defend against. A weapon that made every Sith Lord vulnerable, no matter how powerful they believed themselves to be. The Sith Empire descended into paranoid chaos. Chapter 9. The Sith Response. The ruling Dark Council convened in emergency session to address the Carax crisis. They faced an impossible situation. If they moved against Carax directly, he would use the severance engine to strip them of their Force connections. If they did nothing, he would systematically eliminate every rival until he ruled the entire empire. But the Dark Council had one advantage: numbers. Darth Vitiate, the immortal Sith Emperor, commanded resources across hundreds of worlds. He could field armies of Sith Lords, legions of dark side acolytes, fleets of warships. Carax's weapon was powerful, but it had limitations: range, power requirements, targeting capacity. Vitiate's solution was brutal and effective. He dispatched 50 Sith Lords simultaneously to attack Carax's fortress from multiple directions. The severance engine could target perhaps 10 or 15 Force users at once before needing to recharge. The other 35 would reach Carax before he could use it again. The assault was a slaughter. Carax managed to sever 8 Sith Lords before the device overloaded from rapid use. The remaining 42 overwhelmed his defenses and destroyed him. But in the process, they also destroyed the severance engine, shattering it into fragments that could never be reassembled. Emperor Vitiate personally issued a decree that would govern Sith policy for the next 4,000 years. Any Sith who attempted to recreate severance technology would be declared enemy of the Empire and hunted by every Sith Lord alive. Any research related to permanent Force severance would be immediately destroyed. Any rumors of severance engine fragments would be investigated and eliminated. The Sith Empire, built on ambition and betrayal, had encountered the one weapon that terrified them more than death itself: the permanent loss of their power. They would rather die as Force users than live as ordinary beings, and they would ensure no one ever held the threat of severance over them again. But the knowledge couldn't be completely erased. Fragments of research remained scattered across the galaxy, and eventually someone would try again. 8-4. The Modern Era, Chapter 10, The Old Republic Discovery. 3,000 years later, during the height of the Old Republic, a Jedi archaeologist named Master Bryn Kelor discovered intact Jedai records in a forgotten vault on Ossus. Among thousands of historical documents, she found Cara Dule's complete research notes on the severance engine. Master Kelor brought her discovery to the Jedi Council immediately, believing it was an important piece of Jedi history that should be preserved. The Council's reaction shocked her. Grand Master Zim ordered the research sealed in the restricted archives, accessible only to Council members. He forbade Kelor from discussing her discovery with anyone. When she protested, he revealed something she hadn't known. The Jedi Council had always known about the severance engine. Records of it had been passed down through Grand Masters for thousands of years, kept secret from the wider order. The Council believed that knowledge of permanent Force severance was too dangerous to be widely known. If Sith Lords learned a working severance engine could be built, they would dedicate infinite resources to creating one. If Jedi knew such a weapon had once existed, some might be tempted to recreate it for use against the Sith. Master Zim explained the Council's position. The galaxy was safer believing permanent Force severance was impossible. Let both Jedi and Sith think the Force connection was inviolable. Let them believe the worst that could happen was death, not the living nightmare of existing without the Force. Master Kelor accepted the reasoning, but she made one request. She wanted to study the research, to understand the theoretical principles purely for academic purposes. Zim reluctantly agreed, on the condition that Kelor work in isolation and share her findings with no one except the Council. For 5 years, Kelor studied Cara's research in a sealed room in the depths of the Jedi Temple. She came to understand the terrible beauty of what the Jedai had created. The severance engine wasn't just a weapon, it was a fundamental breakthrough in understanding how the Force interfaced with consciousness, how living beings maintained their connection to the universal energy field. And Kelor realized something that terrified her. The principles weren't just theoretical anymore. Modern technology had advanced far beyond what the ancient Jedai possessed. With current understanding of quantum mechanics, force physics, and crystalline computing, someone could build a severance engine that was smaller, more powerful, and far more dangerous than anything Cara Dule had imagined. They could build one that worked on a galactic scale. Chapter 11. The nightmare scenario. Master Kalor's theoretical calculations revealed a horrifying possibility. A sufficiently powerful severance engine, configured properly and positioned at a strong force nexus, could theoretically create a cascading severance effect that would spread across the entire galaxy through the force's interconnected nature. Every force-sensitive being in the galaxy would feel their connection begin to fade simultaneously. Within hours, perhaps days, the entirety of galactic force sensitivity would be permanently severed. Billions of beings would lose their connection to the Force forever. The Jedi Order would cease to exist. The Sith would be destroyed. Every Force-using species would become ordinary. The Force itself wouldn't be destroyed, but its connection to living beings would be broken permanently across the galaxy. It would take millions of years of evolution for Force sensitivity to re-emerge naturally. One weapon, one activation, and the age of Force users would end forever. Kalor brought these calculations to the Jedi Council. The implications were staggering. If the Sith learned this was theoretically possible, they might attempt it out of spite if they believed they were losing. If desperate Jedi learned it was possible, they might consider it a final solution to end the Sith threat permanently, even at the cost of the Jedi themselves. Grand Master Zim made a decision. Kalor's research would be destroyed. The original Jedai records would be destroyed. Every fragment of severance engine theory would be hunted down across the galaxy and eliminated. The Jedi would deliberately erase this knowledge from existence, even from their own histories. And Master Kalor, despite her protests, despite her academic integrity, despite her service to the Order, would have her memories of the research removed through Force meditation. She would forget she ever studied it. The Council couldn't risk even one person knowing the complete theory. Kalor accepted this sacrifice. She understood what was at stake. Before the memory wipe, she wrote one final report for the Council's eyes only. In it, she said, "I have spent 5 years studying the most dangerous knowledge in the galaxy. I have calculated how to end Force sensitivity forever. And I beg you, Masters, ensure that no one ever walks this path again. Some doors should remain closed. Some questions should never be answered. Let the severance engine remain buried in history, feared but forgotten." The Jedi Council performed the memory wipe the next day. Then they destroyed every record of Kalor's research. They believed they had finally ended the threat of severance technology forever. But 30 years later, the Sith Empire attacked the Republic, and the question arose again. Should the Jedi use their ultimate weapon? Chapter 12. Revan's Choice. During the Mandalorian Wars, Jedi Knight Revan gained access to the restricted archives while searching for weapons to use against the Mandalorians. There, hidden in the deepest vaults, he discovered fragments the Council had missed, references to something called severance technology, hints that permanent Force severance was possible. Revan was brilliant, perhaps the most analytically gifted Jedi of his generation. From those fragments, he reconstructed enough theory to understand what the severance engine did and why it had been suppressed. And he faced a terrible temptation. The Mandalorians were slaughtering Republic worlds. Conventional warfare was failing. The Jedi Council refused to act decisively, but if Revan could recreate the severance engine, he could end the war instantly. Strip the Mandalore and his warriors of any Force sensitivity. Make their Force-using shamans powerless. Turn the tide of the war with one weapon. Revan spent 3 weeks calculating whether he could do it, whether the fragments were enough, whether he could fill in the gaps with his own understanding, and he concluded that yes, he probably could. With enough time and resources, he could build a working severance engine. Then he destroyed the fragments he'd found and erased his own research notes. In his journal, recovered thousands of years later, Revan explained his reasoning. I could build this weapon. I could use it to save millions of lives. But the precedent would doom the galaxy. If I prove force severance is possible, others will recreate it. Better weapons. More efficient weapons. Eventually someone will use it not to win a war, but to end the force itself. I choose to let millions die now rather than risk billions losing the force forever. This is the hardest choice I've ever made. May the force forgive me. Revan never told the Jedi Council what he'd found. He went on to defeat the Mandalorians through conventional military genius. He fell to the dark side, became a Sith Lord, and eventually redeemed himself. Through all of that, he never once revealed that he'd discovered severance fragments or considered rebuilding the weapon. Some knowledge was too dangerous even for Revan. Aceit 5, The Legacy. Chapter 13. Why the Sith Fear It. The Sith Empire has existed in various forms for 7,000 years. In all that time, through all their conflicts and power struggles, one rule has remained absolutely consistent. Any Sith who researches force severance technology is executed immediately by unanimous consent of all other Sith. This is extraordinary. The Sith kill each other constantly through betrayal and ambition. But when it comes to severance research, every Sith Lord in existence will temporarily unite to eliminate the threat. It's happened 11 times in recorded Sith history. 11 times. A Sith researched force severance. 11 times every other Sith Lord stopped fighting each other and cooperated to kill the researcher. Why? Because the Sith understand their own nature. They are defined entirely by their power, by their connection to the dark side. A Sith Lord stripped of the Force isn't just defeated, they're erased. Their identity, their purpose, their very self-concept is destroyed. They would rather die with their power intact than live without it. Death the Sith can accept. Death in combat is glorious. Death from a rival's ambition is expected, but permanent powerlessness, permanent severance from the force that defines them, that is a fate worse than death. That is annihilation of the self. The Sith fear the severance engine because it threatens the one thing they value above everything else, their power, and they fear it because they know how they themselves would use it if they possessed it. They would use it to eliminate rivals, to maintain dominance, to ensure no one could ever challenge them. They would use it until force sensitivity itself ceased to exist. The Sith fear the weapon because they understand exactly how dangerous they would be if they possessed it. In the era of Darth Sidious and the Galactic Empire, rumors of force severance technology surfaced one final time. Imperial researchers studying ancient Sith records discovered references to the severance engine. They brought these findings to Emperor Palpatine, believing he would be interested in a weapon to use against surviving Jedi. Palpatine ordered the research destroyed and the researchers executed. This shocked his subordinates. Palpatine was known for embracing forbidden knowledge, for seeking out dark side secrets no matter how dangerous. But even he recognized that force severance technology was too risky to develop. In private conversations recorded by Imperial intelligence, Palpatine explained his reasoning to Darth Vader. The severance engine would give us ultimate power over Force users. We could eliminate every Jedi in the galaxy permanently, but the moment that weapon exists, we become vulnerable to it ourselves. Our apprentices could use it against us. Rebels could steal it. It would become a weapon of mutual destruction. Better that it never exists at all. Vader agreed. For all his power and ruthlessness, even Vader understood that some weapons were too dangerous to create. The Sith had learned this lesson over millennia. The weapon that gives you ultimate power is the same weapon that makes you ultimately vulnerable. After Palpatine's death, Luke Skywalker discovered fragments of severance research in the Imperial archives. He brought them to the New Republic Senate, arguing they should be studied as historical artifacts. The Senate debated for 3 months about whether knowledge should ever be suppressed. Finally, the new Jedi Council made a decision. Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, and the assembled Jedi Masters voted unanimously to destroy the fragments and seal all records of Force severance research. Luke explained, "The Force connects all living things. That connection is precious. A weapon that can break it permanently is a weapon that threatens the very foundation of what we are. Some knowledge must remain forgotten, not because we fear it, but because we respect what it could destroy." The fragments were destroyed. The last known references to severance technology were erased, and the weapon that both Jedi and Sith feared passed from reality into legend. Today, 10,000 years after Cara Dune built the first severance engine, the weapon exists only in the most restricted archives, known only to a handful of beings in the entire galaxy. The complete plans have been lost. The theoretical principles have been suppressed. Even the name Severance Engine has been forgotten by all but the most dedicated scholars. But the fear remains. Every Jedi Master who learns the secret history of the Order is told about the weapon that could end them all. Every Sith Lord who rises to power eventually hears whispers of the ancient device that even the Sith refused to recreate. The Severance Engine killed no one directly. It destroyed no planets. It fired no shots. Yet it remains the most feared weapon in galactic history because it threatened something more fundamental than life itself. It threatened the Force connection that defines Force users' very existence. The Jedi suppressed it because they recognized knowledge that endangers the galaxy must sometimes be forgotten. The Sith suppressed it because they understood their own nature well enough to know how they would abuse such power. And that, perhaps, is the truest measure of how dangerous the Severance Engine was. When both sides of the Force agree, a weapon must never exist. When both Jedi and Sith unite in fear of the same technology, when even the most ambitious Dark Lords and the most idealistic Jedi Masters reach the same conclusion, that weapon represents a line that must never be crossed. The Severance Engine remains buried in history, its secrets lost, its threat ended, and the galaxy is safer for that loss. Some weapons are too dangerous to exist. Some knowledge is too terrible to preserve. And some doors, once closed, should remain closed forever. This is why every Sith Lord feared the ancient Jedi weapon, not because it could kill them, but because it could take away everything that made them who they were. And that fear, that primal terror of losing one's identity and power, is a fear that transcends light and dark, Jedi and Sith, good and evil. It is the fear of ceasing to be yourself. And that fear, unlike the weapon itself, will never be forgotten.